Now let's select the side material, so the relative layer will be shown. Let's delete this empty one and create a new fill layer so we can establish some base value. We want this material to be also a metal, and I wanted to create a Damascus-like effect, something like this. But first, let's set some base value. So let's disable the normal, and we want to be metal. Let's leave the roughness to 0.3 for now, and as the base color, let's choose some darker gray value, like this. Let's say 75, 75, 75. Now let's start to add some base noise, so let's create a new fill layer. This will affect only the height and roughness, so we want to disable color, metal and normal. Now right click, add black mask and add a fill layer. Here let's reopen our asset window and let's see. We want to use some fractal. Let's try this 3D ridge fractals noise. Let's drag it here. We can close the windows for now. And now on the base layer, let's change the roughness very slightly and also lower the height so we can see the effect we are getting. Now let's tweak the setting of the noise, so select the mask and select the fill layer. As you can see on this 3D ridge fractal, you have some preset if you want to try those. Also, you can visualize the mask always with Alt and click. We have some different preset, but I believe I want to undo it and make my own setting. So let's see. We want to increase the size Z, so let's crank it up. You can go over the slider, so we will put it 10. We will have some vertical noise. Then we want to increase the distortion intensity, so let's say something like this. And also we want to increase the roughness of it, so let's say 0.8. So M to display the material, and I believe it's good for the setting, but it's too strong, so let's decrease the value till we have something which is very light. And also we can go back to the noise, and I believe 10 is too strong, let's use 6. So it will be more subtle. So we establish our basic noise. We can rename the layer to noise 1. And now for the Damascus, we actually want to create a group with a mask like before, because we will use a couple of layers to control our Damascus pattern. So first, let's create the group. We'll call it Damascus and create a fill layer that will go inside. So now if we add the black mask to the group, we can create our Damascus pattern. So now with the mask selected, let's add our first fill layer. This time we want to use this 3D Voronoi fractal. Let's alt click to visualize the mask, and the first thing we want to change on this noise is the style. As you can read here, it says F1. This is quite similar to the Worley noise in Houdini. Basically, the F refers to the index of the points that are scattered and used by the noise to calculate the pattern. So this time we want to use F2 minus F1. So we have something like this, and now let's tweak the other parameters. We want to be a little bit darker, so let's say 0.4. Let's double the size in the Z-axis and increase the distortion intensity. We also want to decrease the roughness this time, but we want to increase the lacunarity of it. The lacunarity is basically the repetition of an underlying noise between the different octaves of your noise. So we want to set it to something like this, 2.8, let's say. So now that we have something like this, we can add a filter to it. So let's add a filter, and we want to use this gradient dynamic filter. Now change the style to vertical, and on the gradient source, let's take this gradient linear 1. So basically we are taking these values, black and white, and we are remapping those values with a gradient. So now if we increase the tiling of that gradient to, let's say, 7, we are using the gradient always to remap, but we are repeating that gradient over a single ramp from black to white. So we're starting to have something like a Damascus pattern. Now let's increase the contrast also, let's say 0.5. And maybe we want to also increase the size Z on the noise itself. Let's set it to 2.5. So press M and we have something like this. So now for the base value of the first layer of Damascus, let's call it Damascus 01. It's not very easy in Substance to immediately know what's in a group because of how the hierarchy is organized, but basically we are operating on the first layer of the Damascus group. I hope it's clear. So let's disable the normal, and we don't want to use it to change the height. We don't want to use it for the metal either. Just let's decrease the roughness of it, or maybe increase it. Let's see. Something like this. And for the color, we want to use a darker value this time. Maybe with a hint of blue. So we will end up with something like this. Now back on the mask, let's add another filter. We want to use our blur slope. Let's look for it. Slope, there it is. And let's see, we want to use a custom noise, our black and white spot, black and white spots 2. Let's change the scale here, and also to see it, we need to tell the blur slope to use a custom noise. Let's alt click, and also intensity divider, we want to set it to 10. The intensity is way too strong for now. And now increase the noise repetition. Let's try 10. We want even a lower intensity, so let's say 002. You know, just something to roughen up this pattern overall. So let's press M, and we have something like this. Now we want to create another fill layer for the Damascus group. So let's create it, and let's call it Damascus 02. And we want to enable just the height and the roughness. Now let's add a black mask and also a fill layer to it. We want to use another time this 3D rigid fractal, and let's change some values. We want to have a similar thing like before. I believe it was 6 in size Z. Also offsetted, so it won't be the same as we used on the underlying base noise. Also increase the distortion intensity. Let's roughen it up a little bit more, and maybe decrease the size Z a little bit. Let's set it to 4. And also let's decrease the size X and size Y by half, so let's set it to 0.5. Now press M, and let's see for the values. We want to raise the height a little bit, let's say something like this. And let's also change slightly the roughness. Yeah, I believe that's good enough. Now, as a final touch, we want to add some scratch on top. So let's create another fill layer outside and on top of the Damascus group. Let's call it scratch. We want this to affect only the height and the roughness again. And let's create a black mask and a fill layer. For the fill layer, let's look for scratch. Let's use this directional scratch one more time. Alt click to visualize the mask, and let's see, change it to triplanar. We want to be a vertical noise, so let's make it like this, rotate it by 90 on the angle, and we want to increase the tiling a lot, let's say 5. So now press M, and on the value, let's see, we want to increase the roughness even more, and decrease the height very slightly, something like this. And again, this is nothing special for a material, just a basic shader. I mean, for our camera, the closest distance will be something like this, so the detail we created so far are good enough for this kind of shot. Now, as a final notice, before moving on, let's reopen the asset window for a second. If you go on the filter tab, you can see that you have this PBR validate node. Let's drag it on top of our layer stack. Now our material is red. That means that our material is not following the PBR guidelines. This PBR validate node, it analyzes what's underneath and tells you if your material will look realistic or not according to the PBR standard. Now, if you select the filter itself, you can see here it says validation mode. Basically, the PBR validate analyzes two components, the albedo and the metal, and it can show one of the two or the combined version of it. In our case, the problem derives from the metal, so let's choose metal. And the fact is, by following PBR guidelines, your metal base color can't be dark as this. The metal base value, which is the one interpreted for the tint of the reflection on a metal, should be from 70 to 100% of an RGB value, so it should be somewhere in this range. You can see that by changing the color here, we are starting to get the green value. The thing is, if we fix this issue, so let's say we want to brighten up also the Damascus until we have a full green validation. So if we turn off the validate, this is realistic, but I don't like the result. And probably if we use the PBR validate, we can copy it and paste it on the front material. This will be realistic also. Yeah. Now, the thing is, as I was saying before, always evaluate your situation. What we are building here is basically a fantasy object in a fantasy cave, so I honestly don't care about the validation realistically speaking, so I will undo until I have my Damascus effect like this, and there we go. So it's basically up to you. Of course, if you're building a product design or an architectural visualization, always follow the PBR guidelines. And if you want to study all the guidelines and all the principle of the PBR workflow, I will put this link. It's the Adobe Substance PBR guide. It's very well written and you will understand all the theory behind the PBR workflow. Now for our final material, which is the emission one, let's delete the empty layer, create a new fill layer. Now this will be an emission material, so we will use the color, the roughness and the emission channel. We don't need the height, the metal or the normal, and we also miss the emission channel here. So go to the texture set settings, and here you have all the channel relative to the shader, so we can delete the height, we can delete the metallic, the normal, and we can click on the plus icon to add an emission map. So we can add this emissive. Back on the layer, you can see that now we have color, roughness and emission. Now for the color, we want an orange. So let's take something like this. For the roughness, we want to lower it a little bit, so it will be relatively shiny when the emission will be turned off. And we don't want to tweak the emission yet, because if we activate it and set it, let's say, to white, we won't see the base color anymore. So let's turn it off for the time being. Let's rename this layer to base. And let's create another fill layer to add some variation. So let's call it variation. Let's add a black mask and a fill layer to it. Let's take one cloud, this cloud too. And let's alt click to see the mask. Maybe just increase the scale a little bit, something like 3. Back on the material, let's set it to a darker orange. Something like this. Also with a slight different roughness, and also turn off the emission for now. Alright. Let's create another fill layer. This will be our edge ambient occlusion. So right click, we add a black mask, and this time we want to add a generator. So we can take this ambient occlusion one. Let's alt click to visualize the mask. And let's see, we want to increase the balance a little bit, something like this. And we also want to use a texture for the ambient occlusion. So let's enable by switching to true, and let's choose a texture. Maybe this time this cloud 3. So now we can increase the texture opacity and it will reference to that clouds tree. On the noise parameter of the cloud, maybe let's increase the noise, not too much. Lower the opacity a little bit. And now it should be good, but I want to get rid of this noise effect, so let's add a filter and let's use a regular blur. Maybe lower the intensity a little bit until we have something like this. So press M to see the material. Now on the material value, let's take some brown value, and I believe we have to switch the mask because it's reverse right now. So enable the global invert here, and we have the inverse of that. So now we can raise the roughness of it and turn off the emission for now. So we added some edge ambient occlusion. Finally, let's add some scratch to it. So let's create a layer and call it scratch. Add a black mask, add a fill layer and visualize the mask with Alt click. Here, let's look for scratch map and let's see. Let's take this grunge scratch dirty and maybe decrease the balance. Now let's add another fill and let's look for another one. This grunge scratch rough. Let's put it in add mode and let's lower the balance for this one also. Now let's press M and see for the material values. So disable the emission and also the color. We just want the scratch layer to affect the roughness of it. So let's zoom in a little bit and increase the roughness where these scratches are. Now for the emission, we want to enable it from the base layer and set it to white. So by default this whole material will be emissive, and we want to set it to black. So enable it on the edge layer. We want to set it to black here and also on the scratch. So basically we masked out the emission value on the scratch and on the dirt around the edges. Now we have done with the material and we just need to export the texture. To export the texture, just go to the file menu and choose export textures. It will open the panel with all the settings for the export. In here on the global setting, you have to choose your output directory. I set mine to the text folder of the Houdini project. And on the output template, we need to set it to Redshift. So it will convert the shader we created for appropriate texture for the Redshift material. For the type, we are good with PNG and 8-bit. And if you go on the output templates, you can actually look what the Redshift one is doing. So let's look for it. Here it is. As you can see, this will be the map that will be generated by Substance. And let's see, we have a normal map here, but we didn't create any normal map. You can see to the right of any channel there's a colored square. Let's say for the base color we have this violet one and is linked to the base color, which is the channel coming from Substance. The normal has this brown square and it's not coming from one of these channels. It's not coming from the normal channel because we didn't have one. Is coming from the converted maps. This will be the normal map converted by the height map we created in Substance. So we will have the correct normal for our Redshift material. Now let's go back on the setting, and on the front material setting we can disable the height map because we will use just the normal, and we can also disable the emission color here. Same thing for the side material. For the emission one, we can disable the metalness and the normal and also the height field because we're just using the color, the roughness and the emission color. I'm sorry if it's not easy to read the full name of it, but it seems I can't really make it visible in any way. So we choose the map we want to export. Now we just need to click on export and Substance will generate all the texture. So on the output folder, you will find all the texture we just created with Substance.